Oh, it stopped, didn't it?
It did. I can see you again.
It won't let me. I can't hit. I can't. Oh.
Let's see what this is up here. There's a. You're live.
It looks like I can't do any chats, so I can't chat in my own relay room.
Let me see if I can do a chat. So you push this icon button here. Send us a message. Oh, okay, that's not it.
It says I'm read only.
Yep.
That doesn't make a lot of sense, so I'm not sure.
Oh, here we go. Someone just popped in.
Let's see. I don't see anyone. Oh yeah. Good. How do I say thank you? I can't reply on my own channel. Well, Brenton, it looks like everybody wants us to get started early. How do you feel about that?
Sure. Yep.
Well, I haven't figured this out, everyone, so I'm not sure if I can, if I can reply to you. It looks like I can. It's only read only for me here. I'm going to have to figure that out. But I am going to put on a chat overlay so that you can see what other people are chatting, and hopefully that'll work. I don't know how many of you are super familiar with the story, but do you think it's wise to start now, or we'll just wait till 3 until everyone else thinks we're going to start? What do you think?
Maybe a few
Eric
more
Carroll,
people.
how you doing, buddy? My buddy Eric Carroll's here. Hey, Rose. I'm just learning this software, guys, so we started a little bit early so that we could kind of get it all figured out. We've got 9 people on, and I'm trying to figure out how to actually respond in chat. It looks like it's all read-only for me. So,
Chambers.
there's Chambers. How you doing, Chambers? Thanks, guys, for coming in early. We started it up just to test it because I haven't used this software before. So I think we're going to go ahead and just start at 3. But if you have questions, I guess it's a good time, Brenton, for us just to take questions from the audience. Hey, Ashley, how are you? How's school? Brenton, everything looks squared away on your end?
Yeah, I can see the chat.
Great.
I can't reply to it, but I can see it.
Yeah, I like this format, so this works. Ashley's on the dean's list, as expected.
Of course.
You know, the only question is really, why isn't she number 1 in the entire school? She's a machine. Oh, Shelly, I'm sorry to hear about that. I am so sorry about that.
Yeah, Jeff and I were talking about that. Chambers, we're going to put it up a couple places if we can figure it out.
I'm going to have a video download afterwards, Chambers. We'll see if we can get it to you. I tried to stream this to YouTube at the same time, but YouTube won't verify me. I don't know if I'm blacklisted or not. So, but I can't seem to get verified. Thanks everybody for being patient. We have some awesome background music we can do before we begin. We'll start that right before we begin, I guess. Brenton, do you have a YouTube channel?
I do. Yep.
You do? Okay, I just created one. That's why mine's not verified yet. So the court shut me down on everything. So yes, Rose, I do have another attorney. His name is James S. Bell, and he's very aggressive, very good. He particularly dislikes the law firm of Coons Fuller that I'm going against, and he's also very expensive. He's $450 an hour, but he's good. Brenton has been helping and supporting me from the very beginning, everybody. So you guys should know he's like one of the OGs on this issue. And I really would like to see a lot more dads talking about this issue. If you notice, the discourse is just really dominated by women's groups, and I would like to see fathers get more involved. A lot of fathers are under gag orders, and we'll talk about that during our talk, and they're afraid to speak out. And we have to get over that fear. And I think Rob Hoagland showed both Brenton and me the way on that. So we should give a shout out to Rob Hoagland as well. So, and just to let everybody know, we're planning to start at 3. This was just a test to make sure the software would work because I've never used this software before. So we'll probably cut this part out of the video, but we'll start officially at 3. Shelly, if you want to contact me, we can get you on here and talk about that, about what's going on with your son as well, and get your views of sort of what's going on with this craziness. So just get in contact with me through the Save James page, and be happy to schedule it. We may bring Brenton back for that too.
Yeah, this is a good idea, Jeff. This is going to be a really good forum to bring this stuff together.
I like that we can let other people ask questions. There's so many questions that I get, and I feel like people don't get their questions answered thoroughly because we don't have time, or we're in that, it's hard to type an answer in Facebook, Actually, nothing went wrong with the latest session. We actually just started this session 30 minutes early to make sure everything worked. But we're officially starting at 3. We want to give everybody time to get here, so we don't want to start right now. We want to crank it up at 3 when we promoted it on Facebook. That's all. It's just awful to hear about this. We're in, Brenton and I are in 2 groups, Oasis, A Place for Parents, and Compassion Coalition, and then also Christian Compassion Coalition. And we just hear these stories all the time. It's just getting worse and worse. Okay, we'll talk about the legislative session before we start. That's a good thing, Ashley. So I had 4 bills in the legislative session here in Texas. Now in Texas, we only let our legislature meet for about 4 months every other year. That way they can't do much damage. So they have to get everything done in that 4 months. A common way to kill bills is to just let them expire through the session, because that means you just can't try again for another 2 years. So I had 4 bills. I had 2 in the Senate and 2 in the House. And we had basically 2 strategies. One was to go after the procedures themselves through insurance and liability, because if you can't get liability insurance, hospitals just aren't going to let you do the procedures. The others were to classify these procedures, these transgender surgical procedures, as actual child abuse. We got a tremendous amount of pushback on classifying them as child abuse because there was an unwillingness to involve CPS in these issues. There was an unwillingness to hold parents accountable under the child abuse laws, even though we didn't have any criminal penalty for this. It was simply classified as child abuse for the purposes of family court assigning possession of children. So there were no criminal penalties associated with it. We got a tremendous amount of pushback from that, and it just got nowhere. The bill that limited the procedures, that effectively outlawed the procedures, got a lot of traction and became consensus in the session that that's what they were going to pursue, both in the Senate and in the House. In the Senate, the bill was SB 1311. In the House, it was HB 1399. They were identical language. We have a special rule here in Texas that if you have identical language that passes in both houses and the governor signs it, it goes in effect the 1st of September, immediately after the session. So you don't otherwise you have to wait a year before it goes into effect to give lots of time for the agencies to get on board. So what happened was the Dade Phelan, who is the Speaker of the House, is a big LGBT supporter. He has 100% approval rating from basically all the LGBT organizations. He gets a lot of money from them. And he did everything he could to kill these bills. He pressured Representative Stephanie Click in the Health Committee to delay the bill. And the bill was unnecessarily delayed in there. And it was, you know, there were lots of bills with higher bill numbers that were heard way before our bill was heard in her committee. But they finally voted it out and went to the Calendars Committee, and the Calendar Committee just let it sit there until the end of the session, and then they let it expire. So they voted it out onto the House floor at a time when there were 300 or 400 bills in front of it, and there was no way they were ever going to get time to vote on it. This is a common way to kill bills. So what happens is, in Texas, this is a way for representatives to say, see, I voted to put this on the floor for a vote, full well knowing that it was never going to get a vote, and they can go back to their constituents and say they were conservatives. And that way they please their constituents and get their votes, and they please their liberal paymasters and get their campaign donations. So it's a scam that gets played on voters here in Texas all the time, and it almost always revolves around the Calendar Committee. One of the things that was a little irritating for me about this was I'm crazy, so I just went and read the House rules. And there's a big, thick rule book for how the House conducts itself and governs itself. And we've been told for 20 years in this state that there's something called tagging in the Calendars Committee, and the minority party, which is the Democrats, could tag bills and just block them in the Calendar Committee. So I found out that's just not true. There's no such thing as tagging in the rules. That actually it was just a courtesy that was extended by the chairman, the Republican chairman of the committee. So Republicans in this state for 20 years have just been allowing Democrats to block arbitrary bills in the Calendar Committee for no reason. So then we started putting pressure on the members of the Calendar Committee and asking them to offer a motion to simply schedule the bill, because any representative can offer a motion to do it at any time. But it sat in the Calendar Committee for over a month, and by then it was too late. And that was done on purpose. So the Republican establishment in the state of Texas, led by Governor Abbott, Dade Phelan, Dustin Burrows, Representative Dustin Burrows from Lubbock, all worked together to kill this bill and to allow sex change surgeries on kids. Governor Abbott, Dade Phelan, and Dustin Burrows approve of sex change surgeries on minors. And we're just going to have to let their constituents know that and see if we can't take care of that in the primaries. That is the brief version of what happened. I will tell you also that I was told by staffers in the Speaker of the House's staff that we put more political grassroots pressure on the legislature than any bill in the history of the state of Texas. We shut down phone trunks to the Capitol. staffers were recording up to 300 visits from grassroots voters every week on this one bill. So they have never seen pressure like that before, and we still couldn't get it passed. And I think that raises troubling questions. If we exerted more political pressure from the grassroots, from the voters themselves, than ever in Texas history, and we still can't get the bill passed, what does that say about whether we actually live under a democratic regime? Is this really democracy? Is this really ruled by the people? And I think it raises troubling questions that the Republican Party and conservatives are going to have to start confronting. And we may get to that in some later episodes. It may come out in this live stream as well, because, you know, one of the things that's threatening the existence of fathers is the legal regime that regulates marriage and other aspects of our society. So we have a serious problem in Texas and legislature. And I will tell you, in Idaho, the Republican Senate voted down these same laws. In Alabama, the Republican legislature allowed the bills to expire just like they did in Texas. It's Republicans killing these bills all over the state. Remember, the Republican governor of Arkansas vetoed a bill that outlaws these barbaric procedures on kids. And so we have Republicans trying to kill these bills. And part of that is that the transgender movement was funded and created by Republicans. A lot of people don't know that. So I always point people to a really good Federalist article called "Who Are the Rich White Men Funding the Transgender Movement?" And it's one of Schreier's early articles on the subject. And Paul Singer and James Pritzker, he now calls himself Jennifer Pritzker, but he's man and address, James Pritzker. Since Adelson has passed away, they are the largest donors to the Republican Party. And they are also the creators and funders of the transgender movement. Pritzker in particular has put all his money into chemically castrating little boys and giving mastectomies to little girls. He puts it all towards child transgender. So it's Republicans that are funding it. And so Abbott gets many millions of dollars. Governor Abbott in Texas gets many millions of dollars from, you know, the transgender donors. And, you know, he doesn't want to lose that money. And that's what we got. We basically have Republican leadership that is willing to generally mutilate children for money. And I wish I could say I was exaggerating, but I'm just not. Sorry, Jennifer Bielek. Thank you, man.
Yeah, in Arkansas, when he used his libertarian argument, that was painful.
Yep. You're welcome, man. Thank you for being here and supporting us. Min Lin is one of our favorite folks, and she shows up. She does something a lot of people don't do. She actually shows up.
Yep.
So that means a lot.
Yeah, slow walking those bills.
That's the technique that's being used. That's what was used in Alabama. Idaho kind of did that too. That's kind of how they tanked the bill. But they, through a clever procedural technique, one of the senators was able to force a vote, and the Republican senators had to go on record voting against it. So we just have to recognize that, you know, there's a kind of financial uniparty that governs both the Democratic and Republican Party, and there's substantial agreement that they want to push transgenderism on children. And the elites are in substantial agreement on that in both sides. So we have to understand that. If we want to win, we're going to have to figure out how to beat them.
Yeah, the Republicans.
I don't think a lot of good thinking has gone into that, and that's something else we can deal with later on.
Jeff, someone said a while back in the chat that they could not follow the link to the feed.
Yeah, somebody says that the feed is glitching. I'm just not sure what to do on Facebook about that. That's why I really wanted the YouTube streaming to come up, but I'm having trouble getting YouTube to verify me, guys. I'm not sure if I'm blacklisted by YouTube, but it's been 3 days and it's supposed to verify within 24 hours, and they just won't verify me. So I just cleared out my key cache and everything and re-verified, and still not there. So we'll try one more time. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll put this on YouTube later. There's ways to do it.
And a lot of it has to do, with your local internet speeds. So if you're on Wi-Fi at your home, get closer to the router if you're going to do streaming, especially off a mobile device. We're 10 minutes out. Reedy, that's right. This will be saved. I'll make sure Jeff Morgan gets it. He gets all my stuff. He's also just a really solid guy. He does a lot of volunteer work. In case y'all don't know, Jeff Morgan does volunteer video production for almost all these issues. He does a tremendous amount of court watching for families who are getting really screwed over in family court. And he does ambush interviews on judges and lawyers. I mean, he's really remarkable, and he's a guy that is really showing the way on how to do confrontational politics with the judicial system. There's one particular case I know of here over in Weatherford, Texas, where a judge actually exited the courtroom. So we're out in the world where he doesn't have any power to compel speech or anything, and directly threatened Jeff Morgan because, Jeff is exposing a lot of corruption here. He's a good man. He's very committed. And his big issue is no-fault divorce, which he thinks is the root of the problem. And he's really fighting for repeal of a lot of these no-fault divorce laws. And he really was one of the early guys that I had to convince that this was actually happening to us. He really did not believe that this was happening to kids. And it took me a lot of effort to convince him. And when I did, he just really became a solid supporter. So really good guy. Oh, I see. So it looks like it's a problem with the share on the Save James page. Looks like Michael was able to go to my page and my stream and pick it up. So yeah, Reedy, it's really going to be on us. I think you're right. It's not something that we're not going to vote our way out of this. It's going to be concerned parents who won't back down, who are going to fix this in the end. And when you say we're not organized, boy, are you ever right. Reedy is so correct about that. It's, our side of this issue is extremely good at raising awareness. I think we're better than the left, actually, at raising awareness about issues. But the left kills us because they're so much better at organizing. Nothing better exemplifies that than a recent protest that we had here in Texas. The left organized a big protest at a representative's office in Denton, Texas, which is in my county. And we wanted to stage a counter protest in support of the representative because he was a co-sponsor of the bill 1399 that would outlaw sex change surgeries on kids. So our organization, when we got everybody involved we could, and we got 12 people there, and they got close to 250 people there. They are very good at organizing, and I think we need to take a page out of their book on how they do that. One thing is that was a college town. There were a lot of students, but when we look at the video, there's lots of adults showing up. So I have a question from Octavian. Jeff, could your ex or her attorney use this stream against you? Yes, absolutely, because by doing this stream, I am violating the gag order from the court. And I don't care, because the gag order from the court is unconstitutional. That's under both the American and the Texas Constitution, but more importantly, under the Texas Constitution. The Texas Constitution gives extremely broad free speech rights, much broader than the federal Constitution. And in addition, it violates my federal civil rights because it interferes with my ability to cooperate with my fellow citizens to effect political change. So I have no intentions of obeying that gag order, period. I've told my lawyer that I don't intend to follow it, that there's plenty of evidence that will be available to the other side that I have stated that I have no intentions of following it. On July 2nd, opposing counsel filed a criminal contempt charge, and I have a criminal trial on the 2nd of July, in which they're attempting to imprison me for a minimum of 6 months, fine me $50,000, and put me on 10 years of probation because I'm speaking to you about these issues and informing you about what's happening to my son, Brenton Netz's son, my friend Ted's son, what happened to Rob Hoagland, and other children, and even informing you about these legislative activities. My gag order actually prohibits me from even talking about political subjects or whether my son's a boy or a girl. So we have a writ of habeas corpus ready. It turns out you can't challenge these things unless you go to jail. So on July 2nd, I'm taking a jail bag with me into court. They arranged for an in-person hearing. The reason for that is in Texas, a judge cannot criminally sentence a defendant unless it's in person. You have to be in the same room. It can't even be like in the same building on closed circuit television. You have to actually be physically in the same room, face to face. It's called the Confrontation Clause of the Texas Constitution. It was put there so that defendants could plead mercy personally to a judge prior to sentencing. And it's a right of a defendant in the state of Texas to do that. So they dropped the YouTube hearing and scheduled an in-person hearing. So we don't know what's going to happen. I could go to jail. I'm happy to do it. We'll issue a writ of habeas corpus. We'll go to the 5th Appeals Court here in Texas. We will lose in the 5th Appeals Court. And then we will go to the Supreme Court of the state of Texas and we will win there. Well, there won't be any bailing out because it'll be criminal contempt, and there's no bail for criminal contempt. So they're going to sentence me and I'm going to serve it. So, you know, cry me a river. So what? I get to sit in jail, finish up my book, work out, lose a lot of weight. You know, I get free schooling. I can take all the math courses I want from the University of Texas for free. You know, whoop-de-doo. So it's not going to be the end of the world for me. I'm not scared of it. You shouldn't be scared of it. And I would encourage every single one of you to stop obeying unconstitutional laws, orders, and mandates. If the laws, orders, and mandates are illegal, do not follow them. So, well, we're 1 minute out, so I'm going to put on the fantastic graphics that are available to me. Let's see if we can do this. This is the Pride Month, so I'm going to go with the Pride colors. 1 minute. Here we go. Okay. Welcome to the post-constitutional condition. This is going to be my video cast in the future. You can get this video cast at jeffyounger.me. I've also posted a number of articles there already. You can go read those. Our topic today is, can fathers exist? And I have with me Brenton Netz. Brenton, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, good to see you again, bud.
It's an honor.
Hey, thanks for sending those gifts for my kids. It's sitting in their bedroom. I want them to open it up and let them know it's from you. And I printed out a picture of you and put that on the box. So Brenton sent me some wonderful gifts that we really couldn't get anywhere else in the country, just unique from where he is. And that just tells you just what kind of a man he is and how much he loves children. Brenton, for people who don't know, why don't you tell us your story and kind of, how we met and why you're here?
Sure. Yeah. I'll kind of a short version is, so my son, he's 11. His name is Miles. He's autistic. And his mother has been doing something very similar to Jeff's story for quite a while, since he was about 4. She has been trying to, she's been treating him as a girl, calls him Miley, a she, a they, a them, all of that pronoun crap, and pushing dolls and Disney and traditionally girl stuff on him. And I thought I was the only one going through this for a long time. I kind of live a somewhat isolated lifestyle. And when he was, and a couple years ago, I went looking to see if there was anybody else that this might be happening to. And I thankfully found Jeff's story happening there in Texas. And then I followed some articles that were written about it on the Christian Post mostly. And then I was put in touch with some very important people in this battle. And it's then Jeff took my calls and started helping me. And he's been helping me ever since. And he's been a trailblazer. And I'm so thankful that he was able to somehow break through the blockade and get this issue out into the public.
Now, how's your son doing right now? What's the status with him?
Well, he's not doing very good. He's so he does need treatment. He does have real problems. His autism is real, and he's and a lot of mental health issues result from that. But his mother has latched on to believing and pretending like his primary issue is gender dysphoria, and that if that could be solved, that then all of his other problems would just disappear. And of course, that's not the case. And and so it's right now it was until I was able to start getting traction and attention with my campaign that I've somewhat modeled after yours. His mother was really only taking him to a gender clinic. And that was just all of his treatment was like, we're just going to socially, and then eventually very close to getting him on puberty blockers, weeks away. And but as of now, he's not in any treatment at all. And she's making the case. She's saying that the reason why he's not being allowed into any treatment programs is because I'm blocking it, because I'm insisting that they don't promote the delusion that he's a girl or he's stuck in the wrong body. And, and they've been doing that we have not been, we're in Minnesota, and we've been not able to find anybody that will, I guess, kind of push back on that. So we're kind of.
Let's talk about that. Like, why can't you find a counselor for your son that will help him?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we're still trying. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, but to
Aren't there some laws involved here in Minnesota that are impeding you?
Well, it's been a surprise. So a couple months ago, my attorney and I, Robert Roby is his name, we found a Christian counseling a place that does, they say they're Christian. They might not be officially coming up from that perspective, but they openly talk about being Christians. Right. And we booked an appointment and, kind of made Sarah, my son's mother, come in there. And I had really high hopes for it. I thought, they're going to acknowledge biological reality. They're not going to promote this delusion. We're going to get somewhere with this finally. And to our surprise, this particular counselor we got there in Minnesota, Nystrom is their name, they towed the line. They were telling me I'm being, I'm mudslinging, and that when I was trying to basically explain the issue that, what I see as the problem, they were backing up Sarah. And we
Let me ask you, didn't you ask him, didn't he tell you, I should say, that he asked you, what did you expect, Brenton? we don't have reparative therapy in this state.
Yeah, well, he called it conversion therapy. He said
Conversion
that
therapy.
yeah. He said, you know, if you came in here thinking that, you know, we're going to do conversion therapy here, then, you know, you were mistaken. And as soon as I heard that term, I was like, well, we're never coming back here again. And then, of course, Sarah was like saying, oh, well, I'll just come here with Miles. You know, now that she sees that she has somebody backing her up. And I just said, well, I'll just block that too. So we have another family court appointment coming July 7th, just not too long after your next one.
Right.
And it's going to come to a head again. But basically, it's coming down to Sarah's going to say that Miles is not getting the much needed treatment that he needs because I'm being a stalwart and not signing off on it, because now these places have liability because they realize finally that I have joint legal custody, at least for the moment. And her attorney, and they haven't quite filed yet, but I've heard they've been telling my attorney that they're going to try to file for sole legal custody so they can just run around any of my wishes.
This is interesting. So the counselor told you that while he could help your son adjust to an abnormal gender identity, it was illegal for him to help your son adjust to his biological sex.
That's right.
Really remarkable.
Yeah, they got him in a box. I mean, I call it covering all the exits. I see the system as, you know, they continue to watch people figuring out ways to get out of this, and they just cover the exits.
They block them. They do. And I think it's interesting. You know, Lori has an interesting comment here, because I think that's the reaction that most people have to this. It's hard to believe that it's not legal for doctors and psychologists in 20 states. It's not legal for them to help a child identify with their biological sex. They can only help them identify with an abnormal gender identity. That's all they can do. They can't do anything to help them grow up in a normal way. And that's really remarkable. You know, the other side will often accuse us as interfering in the patient-doctor relationship. But look, here they are directly interfering and outlawing a common sense practice. And they do it all the time. And I think it's interesting, too, that it comes from the professional bodies. Which, talk to me about, you know, have most of your problems come from the laws and the courts? Or have you seen equal problems from professionals, doctors, psychologists, and institutions like hospitals?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I call it the passing the buck tactic, that if you don't have enforceable, like, so my silver bullet, you know, being somewhat idealistic, I feel like parental rights are really the one, if not the primary issue, that kind of the solution to these problems is that right now, as it stands, when you have joint legal custody, I think you and I've talked about this, you know, some too, Jeff, is that when you have what's considered to be joint legal custody, 50-50 rights, and the parents are on two totally different views on this, you know, and this would be one of those very extreme issues, as you know,
yes,
where it becomes unenforceable. It's unenforceable. I mean, it's like someone's got to win, someone's got to lose.
Yeah,
and so
the whole system is definitely designed that way. I can tell you in Texas law, that's actually codified into statute. So we have a law here that says this, what's called the standard custody schedule, is presumed to be in the best interest of the child. The court begins with the presumption that the standard custody schedule is in the best interest of the child. Standard custody gives a father 20% of the time. And it gives the mother most of the decision-making, including medical decision-making. So it's actually codified into law, what you're saying, in Texas. I don't know about, you know, where you're at, but here it's considered in the child's best interest that one parent, usually the father, lose.
Yes. Yeah. So what's been happening here in Minnesota is that they keep passing the buck. So every time we go before a judge, they don't quite know what to do. They're like, you know, well, you guys should work this out.
I'm just waving to Jen.
Oh, gotcha. You know, you should exhaust every remedy, you know, before you bring it here. And so, but you know, funny enough, before I was able to get into the courts and try to solve these issues, I was going to the medical group that was trying to trans my son, Centricare in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And they were telling me the same thing. Well, you know, this isn't really our jurisdiction. We can't, you know, you need to go get a court order to get us to stop your son's mother from bringing him to our gender clinic.
Yeah.
And convincing him that he's a transgender lesbian is what they were settling on.
Insane.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then we go back to the court, you know, to try to get enforceable parental rights, and they don't quite know what to do with it either. And then it gets stuck in this holding pattern. And I'll mention this too, Jeff. This would be probably you can relate all this tenfold, I know. Mm-hmm. Then they start bringing in all the, what I just call experts. I just generically call them experts. Okay. Mm-hmm. They all of them get paid $100, $200, $300, $500 an hour to come in and make their assessments.
And you have to pay for that.
Yes. Because insurance won't. So then you're basically just being bankrupted. And it's all arbitrary. It just, you know, you go before a judge and, you know, attorneys will say, well, the judges are blind. The judges can only know what what information you bring before them in this blind situation. And they won't take my word for it. They won't take your word for it as the parent, which, and again, my idealistic world, parental rights should be paramount. Like, just like nobody can override a parent's authority over their children. End of story.
Well, this is interesting. Let's talk about that a little bit, because where should we start? Let me first just start with a recent Supreme Court case here in Texas. It's called In Re CJC. Encourage everyone to read that case. It's a terrible case in family court where a wife had an affair with a man and she divorced her husband, and the court awarded custody to the wife. She was then killed very soon, and within 6 months, in a tragic car accident. And the court awarded visitation time, possession time on the standard possession schedule to the man who broke up the marriage, the boyfriend of the wife. And he had just barely known this kid for a few months. Well, this went up to the Supreme Court of Texas, and of course they slapped this down. This is just insane. By the way, that was a Republican female judge in my county, by the way, that did that. So it goes to the Supreme Court, and here was the question that they settled on, the legal question. Does the fit parent presumption apply in a temporary orders hearing? Now, it sounds like a very technical thing, but what the fit parent presumption means is that the parent has the right to make decisions about the child, not the court. And when the court is presented with a fit parent, it can't substitute its own judgment for what the parent wants. Okay? So the question before the court was, should the fit parent presumption apply in a temporary orders hearing? The state of Texas has been having temporary orders hearings since the mid-1800s. And can you believe it is not established law in this state that parental rights apply in temporary orders hearings? It was not established until last year. Okay? So it's very clear that the courts have not considered the issues of parental rights. So let's start with some basic stuff. This may be the mathematician in me, and I hope it's not pedantic for our audience. But what is a right? When we talk about parents' rights, what is it that you mean by a right?
So that's a question to me.
Sure.
Well, okay, yeah. Well, I believe so that is a good question, and I've heard people much smarter than me talk about this. And to me, a right is a God-given, unalienable right. Mm-hmm. And if you start there, then it gets pretty easy. It sets a foundation that then you can build, I guess you would just call reasonable, just laws that need to be followed in order to continue to back up that foundation right. Mm-hmm. So rights aren't given to you or not given to me by other men. I don't care if they're wearing a costume or not. So that's the way it should be. But again, people will call me idealistic, to say that. But
no, that's codified in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. There's no doubt about it. I take a view where I'm very skeptical of the overall Enlightenment view of rights. And in this regard, I'm probably, a Neanderthal revanchist. Like, I mean, I go back really to like pre-medieval times on this stuff. Like, I think rights are concomitant with duties. When in a society, if you have duties, you're given rights to fulfill those duties, right? And in a self-governing people, if we're going to self-govern, we need incredibly expansive rights, right? The family law typically, interestingly, gets this right. So like in Texas, we have what are called conservator rights, which outline 11 parental rights, okay, that are protected in statute and under the Constitution. And your parental duties are simply the prudent exercise of your rights. So you have a duty to provide education for your children, and therefore you have the right to make educational decisions. You see, rights and duties are like the same side of the same coin, opposite sides of the same coin, right? Yeah. Without referencing duties, we can never reference rights. If we have free speech, we have a right to prudently exercise it. If we have a duty of self-government, then we have a right to work with our fellow citizens to self-govern, right? This can't be impeded by that one. So this is one thing where, interestingly, family law typically in most states gets this right, that duties and rights go together with parental rights. But what I found interesting is that whenever a non-custodial parent, usually the father, exercises a parental right, the court will abrogate it just immediately. Can you talk about your experiences there? I know you've some amazing stories from your son where you're just exercising basic prudent care over your son.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Jeff, here's my version. It sounds very similar, probably the same results. Is I believe that responsibility and authority are the two sides of the same coin. Yes. So if you're going to be expected to be responsible for your child, yes, for example, then to have them say, but you have no authority over that child. Well, I'd like to hear how they're going to square that circle, because it's impossible. And that's the situation I find myself in a lot, is that I am still held responsible for my son. And only more so as he gets older. This is very frustrating. I imagine you could relate to this too, Jeff, is as my son's issues do not get solved, he's going to get progressively worse. I hope. Well, it stands to reason as he gets older, he gets into his teenage years, he's going to get bigger. There's going to be more problems going to result from that. And I will still be held responsible for that as his parent. Yeah,
unquestionably. And because of your child's autism, much later in life than most other children, possibly to the 30s, perhaps even beyond that.
Yeah, I'm kind of just hunkering down for being my son's guardian for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's because you're a good man. That's because you're a good man.
It has to be. So yeah. And so but the courts for now have pretty much relinquished me from any sort of authority, all the way to the point where I can't even tell a medical group, a hospital, oh, by the way, you can't see my son once a week and convince my vulnerable, autistic, impressionable, obsessive compulsive son that he is the opposite gender.
I don't even like to hear this. I can hardly even stand to hear this.
As long as I'm
doing this, I can hardly stand to even hear this kind of stuff. Yeah. Ted Hudico makes it really. He's a very smart man. I know him. I've talked to him on the phone. He's going through some issues too. He's making a good point here. Family law rights, these statutory rights, right, seem to be just abrogated by the court at will, and natural rights arguments and natural law arguments just have no sway with judges. Can you really be said to be a father if you don't have any authority over your children?
It's impossible.
So here's an interesting question that I'm facing. Tell me what you think about this. So I've been put under a $4,000 a month counseling regime. And they get secret counseling with my son. So I don't even know what they're telling him. I do know that they've taught him that he's a girl. They've used female pronouns and affirmed him as a girl. But I don't know what else they've told him. It's secret counseling. And you and I both know that's what got Rob Hoogland's daughter every case I know where a child has been transitioned against the parents' wills because of secret counseling. So I'm very concerned about that. But let's just look at the money issue, right? So there's a principle in land law and takings law, which says that, if the government excessively regulates land and prevents the landowner from putting it to productive use, or takes from the landowner the peaceful enjoyment of the property, it's recognized by the courts that that is an effective taking of the property from the landowner, and the government has to pay them for the property under eminent domain, right? And this is a common thing we all know about how land law works. I claim the same principle applies to rights in family court, right? So if I'm paying $30,000 a year in child support, I'm paying $4,000 a month for counselors, and the court is going to allow continuous litigation. I've been in a continuous lawsuit for 7 years now, without abatement.
Yes.
So that's about $150,000 to $250,000 a year that I pay. If you look at that, it consumes all of my resources and does not allow me to exercise my other parental rights. I don't have the resources to pay for the education of my children. I don't have the resources to exercise all of the other rights, housing and other things. It drastically impacts my ability to exercise rights and authority over my children. And I claim that's an effective taking of the children. That the court can impose such high costs on being a father that it effectively takes the children from the father, right?
Yes.
And in Texas, that's illegal, because in Texas, judges are not allowed to take parental rights. Only juries are allowed to do that. We're the only state in the union that has that. So a judge cannot order you to lose your rights. That has to be a jury. Astonishingly, that argument has never been made by an attorney in the state of Texas. There is no case in the state of Texas where a lawyer has ever made such an argument. Why is an interesting question. But, this idea that, you need resources to exercise your rights, and they take those resources from you, and then they punish you for not exercising the rights prudently that you don't have the resources to exercise. Talk about that in your case.
Yeah. Well, I'm in a very similar situation, but the numbers are much smaller. So I could never afford the numbers you're talking. I'm sure you can't either, but somehow it just continues to move along somehow. But yeah, they will. It really is this simple. They will send you a bill, and if you don't pay it, then you're in some kind of contempt of court, and then they've effectively have taken away your rights. I mean, they just added a step or two to kind of make it look like there's some reason. In my case, I've had to sell just about everything. I kind of live, let's just say, very simply now in order to continue.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But I think I've mentioned this to you before. Jeff is like, one of the things I like to do. I like to fish. I like to, go boating and things like that. And I used to take my son up until this stuff really started to take off and get expensive. And then we would do a lot of those things and find great enjoyment, bonding, getting him interested in other things other than the stuff that's getting pushed upon him. Well, that boat's long gone. Like, I had to sell that boat. It sounds funny, like, oh, poor guy, you lost your boat, whatever. Well, but it was something that my son and I did together.
Yeah.
And they took that from us because we had to turn it into money and give it to that court.
And we don't think about that as taking away the ability to exercise a parental right. But, education is not just intellectual. There's aesthetic education, which educates the passions. There's moral education, and there's intellectual education. Okay? And a big part of the education of a child is being indoctrinated, you might say, or brought into the culture of the father.
That's right.
You have a strong outdoor culture. I do too. I grew up on a farm and a ranch. It's one of the reasons that, I box and wrestle. It's my way of keeping back with the physical kind of work, because I sit in an office all day now. My boys have really latched on to that. My boys love boxing. They love wrestling. I'll give you an example. We were out, a lot of trees got killed here. We had a terrible freeze. A lot of trees got killed here. So I'm taking the opportunity to swing an axe, because I don't get to do that very often. And, I said, hey, boys, you guys want to haul some bushes out and trees out for me? And we'll go out and work. And they're kind of, I don't know if I want to do that. And I said, we're going to be using an axe. And if you use it wrong, you could cut your fingers off. And suddenly they all want to go out and do it, right? It's typical boys, right?
Yeah.
If it's dangerous, we want to do it,
Yeah.
They want that masculine culture. That's a huge part of a child's education. And I think the courts are incorrect to look only at the intellectual aspects of education. Talk about that.
I mean, totally agree.
With your son especially, I think this is very important.
Yes. So a couple things that come to mind as you say that for me is this is why there is a attack on families. So my general feeling is, it's not even my opinion, I think it's just objective truth, is that families are the building block of a society. And if you destroy the family, then you're going to destroy the society at large. And so this is another orchestrated attack on making sure, like you said, the father's unique culture is not passed on to his offspring.
Right. And, when this is another issue that I just, take great issue with a lot of the Enlightenment preconceptions that we have today. One of them is if you look at all the Enlightenment thinkers, especially the ones that our own Constitution, for example, was even based on, Locke, for example, they all do these thought experiments where they look at man in a state of nature and they see what this man would be like and why would he form a government in the first place, right? Locke looks at a man in a state of nature and decides that, man in a state of nature is free. And so the goal of government should be to preserve that liberty and freedom that he had in a state of nature. Rousseau looks at man in a state of nature and says, he's equal to every other man. And that for the goal of government, Rousseau says, is to preserve the natural equality of men. Hobbes looks at man in a state of nature and says, the famous quote, a man in a state of nature has a life that is nasty, brutish, and short. He envisioned it as a war of one man against every other man. And he decided that it was good to substitute a king because then you got the injustice of one man instead of the injustice of every man. And that was a darn good deal, he thought, right? But I think all of these are completely wrong. Nobody is ever in a state of nature. No man is ever born into a state of nature. We're born into small communities called families. And so the starting point for reasoning about these things ought not be the individual in a state of nature, but an individual in a small community. And the small community is as low as we go. So I completely agree with you. But I think there are some presuppositions that have prevented us from looking at this. And what's odd is the law seems to choose one view sometimes, a kind of collectivist view sometimes, and an individualist view at others. And it seems to always choose whichever one is worse for the non-custodial parent.
Yeah, they have it both ways. Yeah, it's their little back and forth to have it both ways and get off. Yeah,
How much time do you get with your son?
Right now, I get him every other Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I have to drive. You won't believe this. I have to drive 1,400 miles, so two 700-mile round trips to make this happen.
Amazing.
Yeah, but
absolutely amazing. I get the first, third, and fourth weekends of the month with my sons, so it constitutes about 33% of the time. Yeah, a third of the time now, and I'm at the extreme maximum of the expanded custody schedule you can get. Now, I actually have an order for 50-50 custody, but it's conditioned on the counselors going through 9 points with me. Things like unconditionally loving your children, recognizing the signs of bullying, things like that. I can't get counselors to certify me on that. So it's been a year and a half, and they won't give me 50-50 custody. And it really just comes down to they can't see that I unconditionally love my son, even though I don't think he's a girl. Yeah. That's what it comes down to. Yeah. And until I say he's a girl, they're not going to give me 50-50 custody. That's their position. They're not stating that. They're not saying that, but that's the reality of it.
this has become a third rail tar baby that they can't within the system that I'm starting to recognize. Even people that aren't towing the agenda are they don't quite know what to do with
Yeah,
because it's just so crazy.
that is
It's
so
so
crazy.
crazy.
What has been your experience in the schools?
My son has a really hard time in that type of situation. He's been removed from school. So I'll tell you, if I got, let's say I got sole legal physical custody somehow of my son, I've come around to believing that basically like the Amish are the only ones doing it right. There might be some kind of variables to that to add to it if you don't want to quite become an Amish person. But basically, I would not send my son to any school anymore. I would just homeschool him.
Yeah.
I think for now, and if until this finally gets resolved somehow, um, the only answer people can do at an individual level is to completely remove your children from the system as much as possible, because all the institutions have been corrupted as far as I can see. The medical institution, the educational institution. Uh, so that would be my answer. Again, I often get accused of being, somewhat idealistic, but
I
I
don't think
don't
you are.
think.
I think you're looking at what would be effective. So in my case, my son, I have two court orders. Twice I've had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to jury trials, and I have two court orders that say that my son is a male by sex, a boy by gender, and his name is James Damon Younger. Okay. To this day, the Capella Independent School District still calls him by his fake girl's name, teaches him that he's a girl, and confuses sex and gender and gets him all confused. When I've taken him to school in boys' clothes, they gave him a dress to wear to school.
Incredible.
We have a very serious problem with the schools. Now, where does all that come from? There's no laws making them do that. Okay. There's not even a political movement making them do that. The political movement in Capella is all against it. What's making them do that is pressure from professional bodies. The educator professional bodies, the accreditation bodies for schools, the school board, continuing education systems are all pushing for this stuff. The influence of professional organizations, I think, has been dismissed by people on our side of the issue, and we're going to have to think about going after them. We need to go after these boards of psychologists. We need to go after these accrediting agencies. We need to make sure that there are plenty of people who are against these barbaric practices are seated on these accreditation boards and are seated on these and are elected in these professional bodies. And this is a question that I'll ask you. I'm perplexed by this. Everywhere I go in Texas, everywhere I go in the United States, I ask the same question. Where are our billionaires that are against this? Where are our lawyers that are against this? Where are our doctors that are against this? Where are our psychologists that are against this? Why aren't they? They're in the majority. Why aren't they voting against this in the American Psychological Association? Why aren't they stopping this in the American Academy of Pediatrics? Yeah. Why aren't they preventing these stupid pronouncements from the American Medical Association? Who in the hell got control of the American Endocrine Society? Right? So they could make these stupid pronouncements, which are provably false based on evidence from Scandinavia, longitudinal evidence from Scandinavia. Where are our guys? Where are our elites? Where are they?
It's a great question. Where I got to just tell you where my head goes when I get questions like that is, I think I go into conspiracy theory territory. Okay, I consider myself conspiracy factualist though, because conspiracy is real. People with means, and it's the iron law of oligarchy. It's wealth and power concentrates into fewer and fewer hands. And right now we have a type of cabal that's running the show and shady. I mean, who knows where this is coming from? It's satanic. It's spiritual. And there is some kind of attack that's happening, a very orchestrated attack on humanity. I ultimately think this whole I call it a sterilization campaign, really, is to try to make it's a generational thing. They still have to deal with us. You know, I'm Gen Z. We're basically, the boomers and the Gen Zs. Yeah.
People think I'm a boomer because of this gray beard, but I'm a Gen Z people.
I finally shaved mine yesterday.
I was a bouncer in punk clubs. Let me put it that way. I wasn't listening to Crosby, Stills, Nash.
Yeah. Me too. And so that, right now the system is doing this dance of a transition of like, they're still having to deal with the old guard that doesn't quite know what to do with this. And they're managing them pretty well too. The boomers, I suppose. And then there's the new guard. But what I really see happening is there's just so much propaganda being just shoved at the young people through media. I mean, we're seeing it now with all these cartoons, and you can hardly get away from it. My son's mother literally surrounds him in a world of this trans stuff. Every time I screen share with him on Zoom, I see the background of YouTube, and every video is just populated with drag queens and she's a librarian, so all the books she's pushing all the time is all this trans child stuff. It's the air he breathes, and so he can't escape it. And that's what I think the system is ideally trying to do. It's just trying to like enmesh people very young. They're creating a market. Of course, Jennifer Bielek talks about this beautifully, how they're just creating a medical market, trillion-dollar industry. It just so happens to sterilize them at the same time. Makes them a medical patient for life, doesn't create families, reduces the population, on and on and on. So
yes,
that sounds kind of like.
I mean, they've written about this. We're not saying anything crazy. They've written about this stuff.
Right. Okay. Yes.
I mean, this is not an issue. I mean, there is. You can't. I mean, maybe it's not, a dominant faction of the elites, but there's definitely a faction of the elites that are definitely pushing this stuff.
So when
there's something I call the globo homo agenda. There is a sense. I talked to a gay producer from NBC one time, and he was a flat out homosexual supremacist. Like he was just saying we're superior, we're intellectually, culturally superior to straight people, and we're pushing this stuff because we think that we will make a better world than you could possibly ever do, just inherently. I think there is a kind of innate belief like that in a lot of elites. So there's no doubt about that. What do you think about, we've talked about the legal structures, we've talked about the schools, we've talked about, the professional societies and the NGOs and so forth. What are we to make of the fact that, within a period of about 3 years, these very expensive $100 million plus gender clinics just appeared in all 50 states all at once.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. So they're ramping up. I mean, what they're like, that can't be, they got to be in the hole financially so far. Right. So it's kind of like you, if you want to know what's coming, what are they ramping up for? Well, they're not going to let these places sit and collect dust, and, they are creating a market. It's a loss leader. And they're going to, in this market's if they get their way, it's going to explode, and they're going to have patients to fill them. So that's when you ask, where's our billionaires, where's the people that are on our side fighting this, I have to wonder that about when a person becomes a billionaire, they just almost by default get inducted into this club of like, it's the population club, or it's
you probably can't become a billionaire if you don't do it. I mean, one of the things I'm in the high tech world, and they're just, for example, there are no right wing venture capitalists. They don't exist, and they're not giving any money to anybody who's right wing. You're just never going to get venture capitalist money. I've worked at several startups, that absolutely vehemently refuse to celebrate Columbus Day, for example. Like it's a condition of funding from the venture capitalists. So yeah, there's no doubt that there's a bias there in the banking system, and we see the deplatforming, And what's interesting is there are a lot of people that we would associate with left-wing points of view that are with us on the transgender issue, particularly with regard to children, right?
Yes.
But they're labeled right-wingers.
Yeah. And they're ostracized by their own side.
Yeah, and they get the same treatment that we right-wingers have been getting for a very long time. Yeah. And I'm one of the things that I find interesting, and I've talked to many radical feminists, and they have a very interesting point of view on it. And I thought it was very convicting. It was a great question. They said, haven't you guys figured out how to deal with this yet? It's been going on. We've been doing this to you for 30 years and you still haven't figured out how to deal with it. Like, they were coming to us to figure out, like, what do we do about it? You know, how do we deal with this deplatforming stuff? And the answer is no, our guys haven't figured out how to deal with it yet. And, you know, here we are on Facebook Live, who could just shut us down anytime for what we're talking about here. And it's fairly controversial, even though we're not anti-trans in any way. We're not anti-gay in any way. We just don't want this stuff happening to kids, right? As I like to tell people, a lot of people who are on with us right now may not know this, but you know, I went to jail in the 80s, standing up for gay rights. Like, I'm not some anti-LGBT guy. Like, I went to a military jail over that. I think it's interesting that we haven't figured out what to do about that. And do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, so I wish I had the answers to that. You know, I'll say this, Jeff. I've said the same thing to people that I've even said this to in a court, like to a judge. If this isn't what often happens is people that don't fully understand this issue, they conflate the LGB with the T, so to speak. You know, and of course they did that on purpose. You know, they locked it into that. And I don't really have any problem with LGBs myself. I mean, you know, it's
look, my girlfriend is an international flight attendant. So as you probably might imagine, we meet a large number of gay men. We haven't found a single one who is I mean, some of them, I mean, as outraged as we are, I've had to talk some of them off the ledge from like violent action. They are so opposed to this child transgender stuff. Some of the people who are most opposed to it are gay males.
Yes.
And yes. And there are some very conservative gay people out there. I don't think people realize that either. Like, I mean, like Attila the Hun right wing gay people, like way to the right.
Yeah. And so I've said that is that if my son ends up being gay, that's the least of my concerns, to tell you the truth. It's not I would feel relieved compared to what the horrors we're seeing so far that can come of this. So the fact that you know, this has been said and it just needs to be said again, is the fact that both sides, so to speak, are coming together and they're finding we are fighting this together, you know, should tell people that this is a big deal, because usually we can't find any common ground. But you know, there are people on, we'll just call it the left, horrified by this. People on the right, horrified by this. We're coming together and trying to fight it. It's like, that should be very telling as to how important this issue is.
Yeah. So, you know, Jen has raised this issue that, you know, we need to get rid of these Republicans that killed the Save James bills here in Texas. Is there any legislative activity going on in Minnesota, in your state? What are your plans for that? Or what's going on up there? I mean, we see a lot of civil unrest in Minnesota. I mean, really bad stuff. So what's going on?
Well, Minnesota is a very liberal state. It's a blue state. It's one of those states where the way the population's laid out, it's the Twin Cities and it's the rest of the state. So it's like, you know, if we're talking about a geographical landmass, it's mostly a conservative state. But, and I'm painting with a broad brush here, I realize, but you know, but the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, are very liberal, and it also is a Scandinavian heritage state that tends to, for whatever mysterious reason, bring some of those tendencies over. You know, so it's definitely a different cultural climate in Minnesota than it is in Texas, even though it sounds like Texas is changing quickly too.
It is.
And you asked, you know, what are we doing up here? You know, it's to tell you the truth, we're watching, like, I'll talk just my very small Save Miles campaign. You know, we're watching yours. We're watching your campaign, and we're making steps as you guys make progress. And we do have some aspirations to try to take this on in a bigger way. I have talked to a couple of state representatives in Minnesota, and it was unnerving how unresponsive they were to it. Like they were uninformed. There was I'd have to go back and remember their names here, but there was one representative right there in Stearns County where my case is going on. And the first thing he said, of course, was, well, I've heard about conversion therapy. I've heard about these children will commit suicide if you don't let them, transition. And you just, how do you start right there when you have a 15-minute meeting with someone?
I know, you can't. It's difficult. It took us years. I mean, we've been doing this now for over 5 years in Texas, and we still couldn't get a law passed. And they admitted that we put more political pressure on them than any law in the history of Texas. Any bill in the history of Texas, we put more pressure. I mean, it's just amazing fact that we still couldn't get it passed. Well, maybe we should address, we've talked around the subject, we've talked about a lot of stuff. Let's address the main question here. Can fathers exist today under this legal regime that regulates their conduct and their rights with their children?
My answer to that is only if you live outside the system. I live in a very rural area now. I moved to the end of the road, almost literally. Mm-hmm. And I've met people and families who are, big Orthodox Catholic families and just kind of families that ideologically they detach themselves from the system in general. And they have children and they're raising them on their own. They're homeschooling them, some of them even home birth. And I think that is the only way to be able to be a father these days, especially to a boy. I mean, I'll say this too, is that I'm kind of the notion that after a certain age, not very old, 5-6 years old, a male child should start spending most of his time with his father, and the daughters should start spending most of their time with their mothers. It's a traditional way of looking at the world.
Yes. The fact is that actually until really the 1950s in the United States, fathers equally participated in child rearing, right? Because the boys when they got about 9 to 12 went with the fathers, and
I've seen it.
Raised the boys. Women raised young children and girls, and that's just a fact of human life for all of history until very, very recently.
And it differentiated the roles,
it did.
which is what the other side's fighting. They're trying to blur these lines, of course, on purpose. And so I have friends who buy small child-sized shovels, and when they're going out to dig a garden or whatever, they get their little shovels, and it's like the boys follow the fathers all day. Yes. And they're learning what their fathers do. So.
Right. That's the traditional human way of doing it in literally all cultures. So. I guess I would say that probably not. Fathers can't exist. I mean, a father is understood in the traditional way, as raising their sons, particularly. I don't think it's really possible to do that under the current legal regime. And I don't think fathers have the rights and authority sufficient to fulfill the duties that they've been given. So you'll hear, particularly in churches, you hear all this talk. Like, it's very instructive to look at a Mother's Day sermons in churches and compare them to Father's Day sermons. Mother's Day sermons laud mothers and praise mothers. Father's Day sermons are just talking about how men are just schmucks and helpless and no good.
Yeah, we won't stand up. We won't step up or whatever.
And so there's a whole. There's like a whole lack of awareness that there's a massive legal regime which prevents men from doing that.
That's right. I call it gynocentrism. I mean, that's the word I use. Definitely. We live in a gynocentric society. So when I hear about we're in a patriarchy, I just have to laugh because we're in a gynocentric society. It's basically run and designed for the benefit of
most fathers to simply participate in their children's lives requires tens of thousands of dollars in legal expenditures every year simply to do that. A mother can absolutely keep a father out of the children's lives if she wants to.
That's right.
And it requires a tremendous effort to do it. And so I don't really think so. I mean, I'm actually getting somewhat skeptical on the idea of whether I can tell my sons, reasonably to even marry. I think marriage has just become something that's so risky for men. Yes. That I haven't decided what I'm going to teach my sons, but it's something that I actually have to think about, and it's extremely sad that I have to do that.
I feel the same.
Now, Chambers says churches won't step in. What has been your experience on that?
I haven't had much experience on that because I live in a little end of the road town, and my son's not receptive to it. His mother is actively trying to keep him from responding to my very subtle urgings to consider that he was created, that there is a God. And so that's going to be another huge challenge. I feel like when I do finally break through that, I hope I do, that's going to be a huge way of starting to heal his mind, because it'll start giving him a sense of purpose.
One of the biggest cultural issues, is religion, and we're in just total denial about this, But there's the Greek Orthodox Church commissioned a very long 8-year study on church attendance rates, for example, and they found that it only correlates with whether the father took the children to church. If the father and the mother took the children to church, it had the same statistical effect as if the father took them to church alone. Whether the mother took them to church had no effect whatsoever on future church attendance of the children. It was random. So there's the impact of fathers, I don't think has been fairly assessed with regard to cultural effects. Now we know about children without fathers are much more prone to criminality, much more prone to drug use, much more prone to antisocial behavior and so forth. But when it comes to just normal cultural artifacts, artifacts of cultural order, it turns out the father is just as important there too. But under the current system, it's been completely designed to remove the father from doing any of those things. So can you be a dad today? Probably. Could you be a father and fulfill the role of a father in the traditional sense under the current legal regime? I think the answer is clearly no. And
living in a subculture, living in basically like a no-go zone. I bring up the Amish again. To a certain degree, they do practice this because they interact very little in the host culture, right? So
yeah.
If people want to go that far, and I do know families that do because where I live, but no, if a person is going to participate in just the culture at large, then no, it can't be done. You have to completely detach.
I'll tell you, in trying to pass this law this session, we didn't have a single church show up on our side. No pastor, no priest showed up on our side. Not a single church donated anything to help any of the grassroots organizations to stop these barbaric surgeries and genital mutilations on children. Not a single pastor or priest showed up to any protest, to any rally. None of them lobbied their elected representatives, and none of them spoke about it. As far as I know, none of them spoke about it in church. So we have a complete absence on our side. However, remember I told you about that protest in Denton County here, where a lot of leftists showed up? We had 3 left-wing Methodist ministers show up to that protest. Like their churches were all over it. They helped get people out. They on their Wednesday service got people out to go to this protest. And our churches just aren't showing up. And
it's got to be like the 501c3 type thing where they're bought and paid for.
Yeah, because a lot the audience may not know, but the IRS's position is that if a church engages in political activities, it loses its nonprofit status and has to pay taxes. So my answer is very simple: pay your damn taxes then. I mean, that's exactly what Jesus told people to do. Render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, and then do your own thing. Render to God what's God's. So if not paying taxes is keeping you from telling the truth about moral and social issues, then pay your damn taxes and tell the truth. It's just money. Yeah. But it tells you how broken the churches are. And those cultural issues really play into, how fathers behave. And, there's a really good book called Why Men Hate Going to Church. And they become essentially feminized, and men don't like going there. Boys don't like going there anymore. And that's certainly been my experience too in the Orthodox Church. So I think we have an answer. You could probably be a dad But the answer to the question of today's live stream, can fathers exist today in America? Probably not. You can be a dad, but you probably cannot fulfill the role of father. And we need to set about thinking about ways to change that. Brenton, thank you for coming on. I think we had a very interesting conversation. I hope that our audience enjoyed my first attempt at doing a live stream. I was a little confused with the technology, but I think I kind of got it down towards the end. Thank you all for coming. And we will be doing these regularly. And I'm going to have Brenton back on a regular basis, and we'll be able to hear more about his ideas and what's happening with Miles. Please keep Miles in your prayers. Miles needs divine intervention.
Yes.
So please pray for this boy.
Yes. Yes.
Please, he's in my daily prayer list. Even me and my sons pray for Miles. You know, I would ask you to do the same. Put Miles on your daily prayer list. Thank you, everybody, and so long.
Thank you.